I'll never forget that night. Not the storm, not the cabin, and not the taste that still lingers on my lips. Sharp, bitter, unforgettable. My name is Amelia. I'm 35 years old, and for 10 years, I've been married to a man who once felt like the center of my world, Ethan. He's 38 now, and though time has carved a few lines into his face, though the spark in his smile doesn't flash quite as often, there are still moments where I look at him and feel the echo of the girl I once was. The girl who fell hopelessly in love with him. But echoes fade. That's the truth no one tells you when you're young and starry-eyed, when you walk down an aisle and promise forever. Love doesn't shatter like glass. It doesn't end in one big moment. Instead, it erodes, grain by grain, like a shoreline giving way to an endless tide. And you don't notice what's gone until you're standing ankle-deep in the water, staring at what used to be solid ground. That's what Ethan and I had become. A marriage that still stood, yes, but hollowed out, routine-heavy, stripped of the fire that once defined us. We still ate dinner together, but the clinking of forks was often louder than our words. We still slept in the same bed, but more often than not, the space between us felt like a canyon. So when Ethan looked at me one restless night, the TV buzzing faintly in the background, and said, "Let's go somewhere wild. No plans, no rules, just us," I almost laughed. Not because I thought he was joking, but because it felt so unlike him. My husband, the man of routines, of careful steps and calculated choices, was suggesting something reckless, something untamed. And God help me, I wanted that recklessness. That's how we ended up on a path that would unravel everything we thought we knew about ourselves. A path that would lead us deep into Blackthorn Woods and into the cabin of a stranger named Gideon. The decision came quickly, like a spark catching dry tinder. One moment, we were two tired people slouched on a couch, sipping lukewarm coffee and pretending to laugh at a sitcom neither of us cared about. The next, we were rushing through closets, dragging out old camping gear coated in dust. I remember my pulse thundering as I shoved granola bars, water bottles, and a faded tent into a backpack. It felt ridiculous, two suburban adults playing adventurers, but at the same time, exhilarating. I hadn't felt that alive in months, maybe years. Ethan zipped up his bag and gave me a grin I hadn't seen in forever. A boyish grin, reckless and teasing. The kind of grin that once made me believe he could lead me anywhere. For a flicker of a second, he wasn't the Ethan worn down by bills and deadlines. He was the man who once pulled me into a spontaneous dance in the middle of a rainstorm, who kissed me under flickering streetlights like the world could end and he wouldn't care. We didn't overthink it. That was the point. We weren't just chasing adventure. We were chasing each other. And so, with backpacks slung over our shoulders, heavier with hope than supplies, we loaded into the car and drove toward the forest that locals whispered about in hushed tones. Blackthorn Woods. They said people got lost in there, that the trees swallowed them whole, and the shadows never gave them back. We laughed it off. Superstition, campfire tales for children. But deep down, some small part of me wondered, what if the whispers were true? What if the forest really did change people? The drive out to Blackthorn Woods felt like crossing a threshold into another world. At first, it was ordinary enough. Just highways and faded gas stations, the kind of scenery you pass without thinking. But as the miles stretched on, the familiar gave way to the forgotten. The roads narrowed, curling into sharp bends that sliced through fields and valleys where the sky felt lower, heavier. Towns grew scarcer, houses fewer. The radio signal faltered until it was nothing but static, and even that I switched off. All that remained was the hum of the tires and the unspoken words pressing between Ethan and me. I caught him glancing at me once, his profile sharp against the light slanting through the windshield. His eyes lingered on me like he wanted to say something important. But then he just tightened his grip on the steering wheel. He always did that, swallowed his thoughts before they could take shape. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable, not at first. It was thick, charged, like the air before a storm. I found myself pressing my palm to the cool glass of the window, watching the trees multiply until they became a wall of green shadows stretching toward the horizon. When we finally reached the trailhead, the world itself seemed to hold its breath. I stepped out of the car and was immediately struck by the crispness of the air, sharp and biting, filling my lungs in a way city air never could. The pines loomed above, impossibly tall, their branches weaving into a canopy that filtered the sunlight until it seemed like dusk had already settled, even though it was only late morning. For a moment, I hesitated. Not out of fear, not yet. But there was a gravity to the place, as if the forest itself were watching us, measuring whether we belonged. Ethan swung his pack over his shoulder and gave me a nod. Ready? Was I? I swallowed, forcing a smile. Yeah, let's go. Our boots crunched over brittle leaves as we crossed into the shadows of blackthorn woods. The sound echoed strangely, magnified and then swallowed by the endless trees. Each step carried us deeper into the unknown, further from the life we'd left behind that morning. At first, it was exhilarating. We laughed, teased each other like we hadn't in years. Ethan mocked my inability to read the map, reminding me of the time I got us lost on the way to the grocery store. I rolled my eyes, firing back about his obsession with photographing every oddly shaped tree we passed, as if the forest were some art exhibit curated just for him. His laughter rang out, deep and genuine, and it startled me with its warmth. I'd almost forgotten what that sounded like. For the first time in a long time, I felt the heaviness between us lift. For a little while, it was just us again, Amelia and Ethan, not the hollow marriage we'd been dragging behind us, but nature. Nature doesn't care about your little redemptions. Within an hour, the sky shifted. The pale blue dimmed, replaced by a swelling mass of gray clouds that gathered, fast and merciless. The wind sharpened, slicing through my jacket, carrying with it the sharp scent of ozone. The forest darkened, shadows deepening, until it felt like dusk had descended for real this time. I tilted my face upward, just as the first drops of rain fell. Cold, light, almost playful. For a heartbeat, I thought maybe it would pass. But within minutes, the drizzle turned into a downpour. Sheets of water slammed down, drenching us in seconds, soaking through fabric until my hair clung heavy to my scalp, and rivulets of water slid down my spine. Guess we're getting the full wilderness experience, Ethan muttered, half a laugh, half a curse, shaking his cap like it mattered. But I could hear the edge in his voice. The trail beneath us dissolved into mud. Roots and rocks glistened slick under the rain, turning each step into a gamble. The GPS in my hand flickered once, twice, then died completely. I shook it, banged it against my palm, willing it to come back. Nothing, just a black screen, mocking in its silence. I looked up at Ethan, panic flickering in my chest. It's dead. His jaw tightened, that muscle near his temple twitching. We'll figure it out. Just keep moving. But moving where? The dirt path we'd been following was gone, swallowed under the storm's chaos. The forest stretched in every direction, identical and unforgiving, a labyrinth of dripping branches and shifting shadows. We kept walking. Hours blurred together, my body growing heavier with every step, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The cold sank deep into my bones, numbing my fingers, stiffening my legs. Ethan's face was etched with strain, his steady facade cracking at the edges. For the first time, he looked as lost as I felt. And then, through the sheets of rain, I saw it, a shape in the distance. At first, I thought it was another tree, twisted and warped by the storm. But as we stumbled closer, it sharpened into something else, something impossible. A cabin. It crouched in a clearing, hunched and weathered, as if it had grown out of the earth itself. Its wood was dark, swollen with years of storms, its roof sagging but somehow holding on. And in one of the windows, there was light, a flicker, a glow, a beacon. Relief surged through me so fast my knees buckled. Shelter, safety, salvation. But tangled with that relief was something else, a gnawing unease. Because if this cabin had survived here, deep in Blackthorn Woods, who had built it? And who was waiting inside? The cabin felt like a mirage at first, something conjured by my desperate mind after hours of wandering through storm and shadow. But as Ethan and I pushed through the sodden undergrowth, it solidified, weathered planks and crooked lines emerging from the sheets of rain. It sat low in the clearing, its roof sagging under years of storms, its walls blackened with age. The place looked abandoned, more grave than shelter. And yet, the faint flicker of light in the window was undeniable. A fire, a presence. We staggered onto the porch, the boards creaking under our soaked boots. Water dripped from the eaves in a relentless rhythm, every drop sharp against the silence that seemed to deepen around us. For a moment, Ethan and I just stood there, shivering, our breaths fogging in the dim light. Then he raised a fist and knocked. The sound was hollow, sharp, a cannon blast against the storm's howl. I flinched at it, every nerve on edge, listening for movement inside. Seconds stretched like hours. The only sound was the hammering of rain and the violent thud of my own heartbeat. And then the door groaned. Slowly, heavily, it opened inward. A figure stood framed in the gloom, as though he were carved from the very woods themselves. He was old, gray hair hanging in tangled strands, skin furrowed with lines carved deep by time and hardship. His body, though bent with age, carried a strength that radiated like a warning. But it was his eyes that stopped me cold. Piercing, deep set, they looked straight through me, stripping away every layer I'd built to shield myself. In that one glance, I felt exposed, like he could see every secret I'd ever carried, every doubt I'd ever swallowed. The silence stretched until it was unbearable. Then, in a voice rough as gravel, he spoke. "Name's Gideon." The words were more a grunt than a greeting, as if language itself was a burden. I swallowed, my throat raw from rain and fear. Ethan managed to stammer. We're lost. We just need somewhere to wait out the storm." Gideon's gaze lingered, flicking briefly to Ethan before returning to me. I felt it like a weight pressing down, rooting me to the porch. His scarred hands gripped the edge of the door, knuckles gnarled, bearing the story of a life lived hard and merciless. And then, without warmth, without welcome, he stepped aside. The gesture was small, but it felt like a verdict. Ethan brushed past him first, urgency overriding caution. I hesitated, every instinct screaming to turn back. But where would I go? The storm clawed at my back. A forest waited with its endless hunger. There was no choice. I stepped inside. The cabin's interior was a world apart from the storm raging outside. Dim light flickered from a fire in the hearth, shadows crawling across rough-hewn walls. The air smelled of damp wood, smoke, and something earthy, almost feral. The space was sparse. A rickety table with one chair. A cot sagging in the corner. The walls lined with hand-carved tools, their edges glinting faintly in the firelight, like relics of some forgotten purpose. Every creak of the floor under my boots sounded too loud, like a trespass. My skin prickled, aware of the silence pressing in from every corner. Gideon moved to the hearth without a word, his presence filling the room even when his back was turned. Ethan and I exchanged a glance, but neither of us spoke. The weight of being allowed in settled over me like chains. Then Gideon's voice broke the silence. Low, gravelly, each word deliberate. "You're not the first to get lost here." The statement made the hair on my arms rise. He turned, eyes glinting in the fire's glow. But nothing happens without reason. Ethan stepped forward, desperation in his tone. "Please, we just need a place to rest until the storm passes. Then we'll find our way back." Gideon studied him for a moment, then turned his gaze on me again. My chest tightened under its weight. My damp clothes clung cold against my skin. But the shiver running through me wasn't just from the storm. He pointed with a slow, deliberate hand toward a narrow door at the far end of the cabin, half swallowed in shadow. I knew before he said a word what that door meant, what it required. And as my stomach twisted, my eyes flicked to Ethan. He was by the fire, his hands clenched into fists on his knees, jaw tight, gaze locked on the flames as if they might provide answers. He wouldn't look at me. The silence that followed was suffocating. The storm outside pounded like a heartbeat against the walls, urgent and unyielding. My feet felt like lead. But I moved. one step toward that door. Each creak of the floorboards was a judgment, each breath a confession. Behind me, Gideon's footsteps followed, heavy, steady, inescapable. I told myself this was survival, that it was necessary, that it was for both of us. But deep down, I knew this was the moment everything would break. The silence that followed was suffocating. The storm outside pounded like a heartbeat against the walls, urgent and unyielding. My feet felt like lead, but I moved, one step toward that door. Each creak of the floorboards was a judgment, each breath a confession. Behind me, Gideon's footsteps followed, heavy, steady, inescapable. I told myself this was survival, that it was necessary, that it was for both of us. But deep down, I knew this was the moment everything would break. The door loomed before me, narrow, uneven. Its wood was swollen with age, stained darker near the bottom, where years of storms had licked at its edges. It wasn't just a door. It was a threshold, and I was the one being asked to cross it. My fingers brushed the rough wood, splinters biting my skin, grounding me in a reality I wished I could escape. Behind me, the fire cracked in the hearth, spitting sparks into the silence. Ethan's breath rasped faintly, too fast, too shallow. He still wouldn't look at me. That broke me more than the storm, more than Gideon's gaze, more than the suffocating dread coiling inside my chest. My husband sat in the glow of another man's fire and let me walk toward the shadows. I opened the door. The hinges groaned, a low, wounded sound that cut through me. Inside was a small room, bare walls, a cot pressed against one side, a single candle guttering on a crooked shelf. The air was colder there, thicker, as though the storm itself had seeped through the cracks to witness what would happen. Gideon stepped in after me, closing the door with a deliberate finality that echoed like a verdict. The sound of it clicking shut sent a shiver up my spine. For a moment, neither of us moved. The silence pressed heavy, punctuated only by the steady drip of rainwater from my soaked clothes onto the warped floorboards. His presence filled the room, massive, unrelenting. He didn't need to speak. His eyes said it all. This wasn't about want. It wasn't about desire. It was about the unspoken bargain that had been struck the moment he let us inside. Shelter for surrender, survival for silence. I stood frozen, every muscle taut, my heart hammering so loud I was certain he could hear it. And then, slowly, deliberately, he reached out. His hand, calloused and scarred, brushed a wet strand of hair from my face. The touch was rough, unpracticed, yet terrifyingly intimate. I flinched, but I didn't step back. I couldn't. There was nowhere to go. Inside me, something shattered. I told myself it was just one night, just one choice, just a sacrifice carved from flesh and silence to keep us alive. I told myself Ethan would understand, that he must understand, sitting there in the firelight, listening to the storm claw at the cabin walls. But the truth was worse, because a part of me, the smallest, darkest part, felt the pull, not toward Gideon himself, but toward the abyss he represented, toward the terrifying freedom of letting everything collapse, of giving in, not out of love, not out of desire, but out of rage. Rage at Ethan's silence. Rage at the years of distance. Rage at myself for becoming a ghost in my own life. Gideon's shadow loomed over me as his breath brushed my skin, carrying the scent of smoke and damp earth. Every instinct screamed to run. Yet my body didn't move. I let it happen. And with every second that passed, a piece of me died. When it was over, I sat on the edge of the cot, my body trembling, my throat raw from the cries I had bitten back. Gideon rose without a word, pulling the door open as if it had never held us prisoner. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. When I stepped back into the main room, the fire was lower, the storm outside quieter. But Ethan was the same. He sat hunched, hands clasped tight, eyes locked on the flames. But the truth was worse, because a part of me, the smallest, darkest part, felt the pull. Not toward Gideon himself, but toward the abyss he represented, toward the terrifying freedom of letting everything collapse, of giving in, not out of love, not out of desire, but out of rage. Rage at Ethan's silence. Rage at the years of distance. Rage at myself for becoming a ghost in my own life. Gideon's shadow loomed over me as his breath brushed my skin, carrying the scent of smoke and damp earth. Every instinct screamed to run, yet my body didn't move. I let it happen, and with every second that passed, a piece of me died. When it was over, I sat on the edge of the cot, my body trembling, my throat raw from the cries I had bitten back. Gideon rose without a word, pulling the door open as if it had never held us prisoner. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. When I stepped back into the main room, the fire was lower, the storm outside quieter. But Ethan was the same. He sat hunched, hands clasped tight, eyes locked on the flames. And I knew. He had heard everything. The shame hit me first, white hot, blinding. But underneath it, something colder, something harder. Resentment. Because he hadn't stopped me. He hadn't stood. He hadn't spoken. He had sat in silence, letting the storm rage outside and inside me, and chosen not to act. I wanted him to scream, to rage, to fight, anything but this suffocating quiet. Instead, when our eyes finally met, his were hollow, empty in a way that frightened me more than Gideon ever could. The night stretched on, endless. The storm battered the cabin in waves, the wind wailing through cracks in the walls. I lay on the floor near the fire, wrapped in a blanket that smelled of smoke and rot, my body aching, my mind fractured. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that door. I heard its hinges groan. I felt Gideon's hand against my skin, rough as bark, branding me with a truth I could never scrape away. Ethan didn't speak a word. Not to me, not to Gideon, not even to himself. He sat awake most of the night, staring into the flames, as though if he looked hard enough, they'd burn away the memory. But fire doesn't cleanse. It only consumes. At some point, I realized the silence between us wasn't just silence anymore. It was something else, something alive. A wound that had split open and would never heal. The storm outside finally broke before dawn. The rain thinned to a drizzle, the wind quieted, and a heavy stillness settled over the forest. But inside the cabin, the storm raged on. When Gideon finally spoke again, it was with that same gravel voice that made every word feel carved in stone. Storms passed. Path'll be clearer now. That was it. No explanation, no acknowledgement, no weight in his tone to match the ruin in my chest. Just dismissal, as if we were already gone. Ethan rose first, stiff, his movements mechanical. He didn't look at Gideon. He didn't look at me. He just strapped on his pack and waited by the door. I lingered for a moment, staring at the hearth, the embers glowing faintly, like the memory of something that had once been alive. Then I followed. We left the cabin without a word. The forest greeted us with a cruel brightness. Sunlight broke through the canopy, turning the wet leaves into shards of glass. Dazzling, merciless. Birds called, cheerful, oblivious. The storm had scrubbed the woods clean, but I carried its filth inside me still. Ethan walked ahead, his back rigid, his silence louder than the birdsong. Every step between us stretched the distance wider, until it felt like we weren't two people lost in the woods together, but two strangers walking parallel paths that would never cross again. And I knew, without question, that Blackthorn Woods had taken something from us, something we could never get back. Not the storm, not Gideon, not the night, but the choice that was mine, and the silence that was his.